Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of DDXtra, the bonus episode of Differential Diagnosis, where we differentially diagnose something else. This week, we're going to be doing a character analysis of the extra characters of House MD. So we're not going to be talking about House this week. We felt that he deserved an episode to his own, but we're going to be talking about all the other big players. This week, that includes Cameron, Chase, Foreman, Cuddy, Wilson, and of course, the big boy, Vogler. My name's Harvey. I'm one of your hosts. And your other host, as always, is Gaz.
Pleasure to be here in Reverb Central in London. I hope everyone's appreciating all of the wondrous reflections of my voice around a very kind of harsh environment, sonically speaking.
Yeah, I was saying to Gaz that the reverb is so good that you could echolocate that room perfectly. But it's actually sounding all right. You've done your best, given that you're in someone else's house and you can't build a little studio like you usually would. That might be quite inappropriate, I think.
If you use the right tools, it would be like the Dark Knight when they activate the mobile phone echolocation system. As long as you promise to destroy it afterwards.
Oh, shit. Maybe we should just turn this into a generic film podcast. That'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic, wouldn't it? Reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the classic phrase is two white guys discussing films. I think it's the most popular podcast out there. But
Yeah.
Instead, it's two white guys discussing House MD specifically. And so yeah, we just thought, like, as usual with DDXtra episodes, it's a bit casual, but we were kind of gonna just run through up to this point in the series. I believe at this point we're about to do 3 stories next week. So we thought that because there's no huge character development for the rest of the team, there is certainly for House, but for the rest of the team, there's nothing really extra that's going to come of this. So we thought that we'd take this time to talk about the rest of the team and kind of, see how far they've come, see what we've learned about them, talk about things we did like, talk about things we don't like, and then as I say, next week we'll go into depth about House and Stacey as well, because Stacey does make an appearance and she's a big character, but she's in it for very few episodes, and so we wanted to talk about her more in conjunction with House than with the rest of the team, because Stacey doesn't really have any character development as such. We just learn that she exists and her temperament and some of her character details. So for now, we'll just sort of run through the characters. We'll chat about it and see what happens. And as always, if you have any different interpretations of the characters or any thoughts or anything we missed out, then tweet us at HouseMDcast on Twitter, or you can get in touch with us over Facebook, which is just Differential Diagnosis, a House MD podcast, because we really enjoy hearing from you. It's very nice to hear other people's thoughts just on it, really, because we're not House MD experts. We're just fans who enjoy the show, and I'm sure that's what you are as well. So your point of views are equally as valid. It's just that we have microphones in front of us.
I guess the other thing is that some of those ideas that you come up with, we actually make episodes about them. So, for instance, the fan fiction one was due to a suggestion from a fan. And so, we want to have as much input from you guys as possible. Once we get to the end of this season, we're going to be looking at doing some other things. So the more you interact with us, the more you give us feedback, the more content we can make for you that you want.
Yeah, exactly. If you say you want more episodes like this, we'll make them. If you say you don't like Gaz, he's gone.
Yeah, I'm out.
It's done. You just got to ask.
Harvey's non-negotiable, I'm afraid, but me, completely expendable. I think the other thing is, if you want more fan fiction, you want us to raunch it up a little bit like last time, then hey, we're your men.
Well, actually, we did have a message relating to a bit of Chase's character
Okay.
from Love Hurts. So I'll bring that up when we discuss Chase's background. It was something that we didn't get to during the
Mm.
Love Hurts episode, where Chase tries to tries to imitate a dominatrix.
Yeah. Well,
Fantastic part of his character, but that's what this episode is for. It's sort of just run through the added extras, because we always talk about the characters during each episode, but I mean, we've talked about Foreman because he's had a lot of episodes based on him, but you'd have to listen to like about 7 hours of material to hear our thoughts on Foreman. So we thought, hey, let's do it in about 40 minutes.
yeah, let's do it in like a portion of that. Let's portion that to about 5 best once we edit. I mean,
Yeah,
unless you
exactly.
want this to be like a 4-hour episode, but
Oh, sorry, no, I meant 40 minutes the whole thing, not 40 minutes on Foreman. But you know what? We could
I'd do
probably do
that.
it, and I think the show has that in it. So it's a testament to it. I mean, the more we watch this series, the more I do. I'm trying to not like be a total fanboy over it, but I like the series, but the fact that we have consistently like lengthy and I think insightful conversations on the episodes and the characters, I just stand out to me that there is a lot to offer from this series. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And when you look at similar TV shows with a similar kind of timing, demographic, target audience, etc., a lot of them can come off as very unsophisticated in comparison to House. Like we said in the past, actually we said it quite early on, the writers do not treat their audience with contempt or with a sense that they're stupid in this series. They really do respect their ability to see that life is quite messy and reflect that in the writing. So kudos for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think yeah. Well, not to stray too far away from the subject, but I think you and me, we recently started watching The Good Doctor, which is another show by David Shaw, which we're probably going to do an episode on.
Mm-hmm.
But we had some like big initial observations at how that show like approaches its characters, and it doesn't really have the same kind of like gray area that House does. I think like it really narrows down on like ethical lessons or like lessons for the characters to learn, or like character traits, and just really like just spills them out on the floor so that you can see them and know exactly what's going on, and you never really are confused about anyone's like feelings or motivations, which isn't a bad thing, because most TV shows are like that, and I think like that's a very clear and concise way to write characters. But the thing that I particularly like about House, and as you say, I think you do because we've discussed it before, is just how up for interpretation a lot of things are, and how messy and inconsistent some people are in the show, but in a way that's clearly like done to demonstrate, that's done to build realistic characters.
It's messy on purpose. The intent is to demonstrate that. It's not like we're lazy writers and we've decided, whoa,
Yeah.
let's just not give a damn. I think the one thing I'd say just briefly is that you see in The Good Doctor maybe an evolution in David Shaw's writing, where he's distilled the elements he wants to look at, which are trying to distill the drama into a kind of more like a courtroom or litigation scenario. We see a little bit of that in House, but the pilot episode of The Good Doctor, I mean, it just feels like that, but times a million. And I guess that's just an evolution of his writing, but I don't see that necessarily as a particular strength. It's not something I enjoy, but
yeah, it's aimed at a different audience. It's got like a very different it's got a very different objective.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's just a difference of taste. What I like about House and what I like about television in general is just going to be sometimes different from what other people or other writers want to write. And that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. But it's just something that I've observed over time. Obviously, as a viewer, they obviously care about my opinions to some extent, because otherwise, no one would watch TV. But being a general viewer, but there you go. It's kind of a bit of a tension between what the writer wants to do and what the viewer expects, and sometimes it doesn't always match up.
Yeah, completely. Which is why it's so nice that we're about to do an episode where we talk about the characters. It's nice that we even have something to discuss rather than going, this person is a nice person and doesn't like this person and wants this, and that would be the end of the discussion.
Yeah, well, it could be. Let's not get our hopes up.
Yeah, that's true. Well, maybe Vogler. Vogler will probably be a quick one. So yeah, number one on the list. There's Cameron.
Okay, yeah.
So I don't know, Gaz. Do you wanna break down the information that we know about Cameron?
Well,
just in general.
The essential open question posited in the pilot is whether Cameron was hired because she looks pretty or not. And I think...
Yeah, I think... as you say, that's kind of... like, that's a good observation of where her character leaps from. I don't necessarily think it's that her attractiveness has got her far, even though House alludes to it. I think it's more how she deals with the anxiety of that from her end. But
really? Okay.
Slightly. I mean, she's bothered by it, and she then spends... I don't think the attractiveness thing is brought up a bit. I think that's one of those awkward layovers from the pilot, but I think that a lot of her character development and is based around her trying to get over the anxiety of how she's perceived. And I think that shifts from her being attractive to her finding that people ignore her or don't take her seriously because I think she's a bit like meek and not very confrontational at points. So I think the show shifts it from her worrying that she's just like getting by on her looks to it being like more of a personality thing.
Yeah,
that was like my observation anyway. That she starts, there's episodes where she starts in control. She starts like doing that thing where she's trying to like change the way she talks, change the way she approaches debates, and then during that entire Vogler arc where he's trying to fire people, like, and Chase is trying to like, beat her down and say like, oh, she's like, Cameron is like where Chase is trying to undermine Cameron, she turns around, she's like, don't think I'm going to take this. These things really bring out a lot of her. And on top of that, then there's like things where in maternity where she is unable to tell the patients that bad news, and then she kind of worries about that. She's like horrified that she can't get over that hurdle. And there's some backstory there which we'll go into, but it's I feel like a lot of it is brought on by her anxiety, more about her personality and like her kind of temperament being quite meek and unconfrontational, like, and how she's sort of trying to really overcome that. Instead of just it being like, oh, am I getting by because I'm attractive? That I feel like that element is kind of dropped. But the initial, like, Cameron is anxious about the way she's perceived, like, continues. But I think it's handled a lot better after the pilot because it doesn't focus on the looks thing, which is kind of a bit more of a throwaway scene. I don't know if you agree with that or you think that the looks thing continues being developed on. I think it gets dropped a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think that the pilot scenario, I guess, reveals the nub of what Cameron's arc is all about in season 1. It's everything seems to be hinged upon, oh, she's attractive, therefore she's been hired by House, and that kind of lays a seed of doubt in Cameron's head about who she is and why she's here, even though she's obviously scholastically excellent at what she does and has had internships at like the Mayo Clinic, for instance.
Yeah.
But what that it wasn't about necessarily the fact that she was or wasn't attractive, and that's why House hired her, but the fact that he said it to trigger a response that revealed something about the character, which was the fact that she did not necessarily have self-confidence, but also a degree of anxiety over how she was perceived. And I think that carries on through. Control is a great example. I think you also see a lack of self-confidence, but also a little bit of cowardice at the beginning of the first season, especially when she's being asked to make difficult decisions, such as telling someone they're going to die or not. She kind of she tries to shirk away from that responsibility, makes Wilson do it. When that's like the essential feature of a doctor, is to be able to tell the patient the truth when necessary, even if it's difficult. And so you have like the self-confidence issue. You have this kind of sometimes cowardice or an inability to face difficult decisions. And then this perception anxiety as well. And in Control, she tries to confront the perception bit, also to stamp her own authority, because Foreman, during the earlier part of the season up to the middle part, is completely dominant in the writing as well, as much as he is as dominant a character.
Yeah.
These things get slowly eked out over the course of the season. So, for instance, we start to understand she married a terminally ill person. She has some sort of complex about people who are sick, or require fixing or caring, and maybe it's a primary drive for her being a doctor, but it can also become a bit of a neurosis or a complex, which can obviously have bad effects too, especially when we looked at the Hammerin situation, where it seemed like the motivation for that was in some way governed by her desire to fix or desire to care for those that seem to be broken. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, completely. Well, it's nice. The terminal ill, like her marrying the terminally ill man, for like the last 6 months of their life is a really nice detail, because I like that it like bleeds into two aspects of her character, which is that she like, she has trouble telling the parents in maternity that their child is dead, and it's kind of like, they use that's when the terminally ill husband storyline comes out, because it's about how she knows what their situation is like, she knows how horrible it is, and therefore she can't face that situation because of that. But then it also bleeds into her relationship with House, and how she like loves House, and then House kind of on their date rationalizes that it's just her trying to fix people, which then bleeds into like a lot more of her character, where she's like so patient friendly, and you think like, oh, is Cameron just a friendly person? And then it kind of bleeds into this complex of, no, she's just like, she's obsessed with fixing stuff. She's not obsessive compulsive, but she's like got a compulsive like behavior that she just needs to be liked, and like, just like do good things for people and be a good person and fix things, which is nice. I like that backstory. Like that backstory isn't like one note. It bleeds into a lot of her character, and like it informs a lot of what she does. It's not just like, oh, my husband died, therefore I don't like being in relationships. Like a lot of characters can be. They have like that tragic backstory, but it doesn't inform like every facet of their personality. Whereas but at the same time, what's quite interesting about that backstory is that she already had those traits, right? So it's almost like her husband doesn't really affect anything. Like, it's not like her husband died and then she became obsessed with fixing people. It's like her husband is a symptom of that wanting to fix people.
Yeah.
Like, and be that way, and like be liked, and like, make things better. So it's quite nice that even though it's a tragic backstory, it didn't like cause her personality. It sort of just exacerbated what was already there.
Yeah, and I think that gives at least the perception that there's a lot of depth to the character. That there's a kind of it's 3-dimensional rather than just like this 2D flat character who goes, I had a bad problem, now I'm obsessed with X. It's like, this is something that's always been part of who she is. And we see it manifest in very different and interesting ways. It's not like everything has to have a discernible origin for the character.
Yeah.
It could just be who they are, and that's fine. And I think that's quite smart. I mean, a lot of other people will try and over-explain or over-elaborate a character trait, and then it ends up just feeling a bit crap. And although, you could say that doesn't happen in House, it does happen sometimes, especially in the pilot, where everything House does is kind of explained by the other characters. Like, House wants to control you because X, Y, Z. It's like, wow, thanks for the psychoanalysis, Wilson, the oncologist.
It's something that's dropped after the pilot, and it's yeah, as you say, like, yeah, I agree. It's like there's not a point of origin for everything. I think, like, it's very, yeah, but also at the same time, like, all of their back. So even though there's not a point of origin for why Cameron's like trying to prove herself so much, like with the oh, I hired you because you're attractive thing, there's enough anxiety there where you can see how that might have developed. I like that the characters are also like they're competitive for different reasons. Like Cameron's really becomes more forthright. She becomes like more trying to like push her ideas and dominate the situation because as you learn, there's this anxiety about the way she's perceived and she wants to be great. And then you have like instances where like Chase is pushing himself forward, but you kind of see that he just wants to be like seen as that kind of maverick who comes up with the great ideas. He just wants to be seen as an impressive guy. And then there's Foreman, who kind of does it because of his like social background, like he's had a tough life and he's just become super competitive to get to where he is. And even though they're sort of performing really well, like the reason they're all performing well is like totally different based on which character you're looking at. It's not like they're all just driven and they all want to be the best. They want to be the best for very different reasons. And I think like, there's just very subtle tweaks, but I think Cameron having this like deep-seated anxiety is just established really well. And she doesn't like, I think handled badly, she could have definitely been like just this super confident, like Mary Sue character. Much like in when House is interviewing, when Cameron leaves and House is interviewing for new candidates, and there's one woman who is super confident and it's like everything House says is like a snappy one-liner back. And to me, that is like Cameron written badly. And I don't know whether or not they did that on purpose. I think it would be very funny if they did. But you could have had that like character.
A bit, yeah. It does sound like a writerly critique, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like they're critiquing their own temptations to have written a character like that. I think you're right.
I mean, I hope so. I think it's if so, it's a really clever idea, and it's but it just really, like, when I was watching that and thinking about it, I was like, wow, Cameron is really well written because she's not that. She's like, she's obviously like, she's attractive. She becomes more confident, but there's like a reason for all of that. And I think that that's really, I just think that that's really well established and really well carried out. I think in terms of, because in the pilot we were talking about, I think Foreman pretty much comes out the gate as quite a strong character in who he is. I think, Chase at the very least also comes out as like, he takes a bit of a backseat. He's a bit more casual, but I think that pretty much instantly gives his character away. But I think Cameron is like a bit like Wilson. Like they're both just kind of nice people. And in the pilot, I was a bit worried by the way that Cameron was being established. I thought she was a bit, she didn't really like come forward. But I think like within a few episodes, like the way that they kind of really push on that anxiety of hers, they really make it come out like really well during the series. And it's yeah, her like backstory and personality and the way she acts are really interconnected. Well, it does feel like a real person.
Yeah, I would also note that in the earlier episode, she doesn't really have much of a prominent role. And you see within the season these kind of phases where a certain character will become the one that's in the foreground, and the other two of the team will kind of go back.
Yeah.
So for instance, we had that entire kind of like 3 to 4 episode streak of Foreman.
Yeah, it was the Foreman trilogy, and then there was a break, and we thought it was over, and then Foreman became prominent in another episode.
Yeah, it was like Foreman, like the sitcom. Um, but we'll get on to that. I have a few funny comments to make about him. But
But
I'd say the thing about Cameron is, at the beginning, it wasn't really clear to me what her shtick was.
yeah,
But it became clear by the time the Hammer and came along that I was like, okay, I get it a bit more.
yeah.
And I think you've nailed everything about that.
Well, no, well, I like your observation that it's like that the backstory isn't a point of origin. I hadn't really thought about it like that, but I think that's just a really nice way of looking at a backstory. It's like, as you say, a lot of other shows will be like, something happened to me and now I feel this way.
It's the old, super comic book hero origin story.
Yeah.
I had X, therefore I am like Y. And the other thing that you picked up on was the that none of the characters have what I call the Ash Ketchum syndrome, which is, why do you want to be the best? Because I want to be the best. Which is a completely redundant way of thinking about a character. Instead, it's more like, why do you want to be the best? Well, I have these kind of weird quirks about me that kind of drive me to be a good diagnostician. And here are some of them, and they're not the complete beginning and end of my character, but,
Yeah,
that was pretty good.
As you say, like if Ash Ketchum had like a backstory where his mother was always like getting, different abusive boyfriends and calling him a loser, then it would be like, oh, I get why Ash Ketchum wants to leave the town and be the very best. But as you say, because that isn't there, he's just like, it's like, I just want to be the very best because.
Well, maybe I'm kind of oversimplifying the character because Daddy's left. He goes, I want to be like my dad. And so actually maybe my Ash Ketchum theory of character building is wrong. But
I like it. I like it as a start point. I think it's it's a really nice example of a more flat character or more baseless character motivation. Even though it is Pokemon and we're picking on Pokemon, but even so, it's like, I totally understand it and I agree.
I was going to say, it's not like it's, I want to be the very best because my dad left when I was young. It's, I want to be the very best, the best there ever was, with nothing else.
Yeah, I wonder if that would have been as kid friendly. But there's But hey, you already brought up Foreman. You're raring to go. You want to talk about Foreman. Foreman's next on the list, so go on. Give me what you got about Foreman.
There are a series of sounds that to me sum up Foreman. Dong ga ding ga ding 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 ga ding ga ding 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 ding. The most neurotic doctor in television history. It's Eric Foreman. I felt like I was in a sitcom with a very kind of ambitious, slightly neurotic.
Yeah, because he's not like neurotic in that
doctor.
He's not neurotic in that nerdy way. He's neurotic in a really like angry way, which is fascinating. I haven't really seen that before.
It's like Curb Your Diagnosis or something. Uh, yeah, what would I say? He's just very neurotic, very angry, and he's really afraid of becoming like his diagnostic daddy house. But he is. He can't. He's like a. It's like a person denying their own very nature. I mean, he starts off in the pilot as, House says, "You're a criminal. That's why I hired you. So you can do all the dirty work." And it's like, what? But I'm really good at my job. It's like, so they kind of elaborate this kind of obviously racially charged premise because he's African American, and he's from a deprived background, like crime. What gives? Um, I know. And from there, we see an unfolding of this person who is intensely ambitious, is willing to shiv his boss if necessary to be right. Someone who is angry, threatening to other colleagues. Push me again is a good line from a recent episode that we reviewed. And what we see, like the essential tension of his character is he wants to be as good as House, but he doesn't want to be House. But in a way, his character is always gravitating to the same kind of ideas and perceptions as House does. And he's very uncomfortable with it. And he doesn't know how to resolve it. Because everything he does seems to make him more like that. And even House recognizes that in Foreman. The ambition. Not necessarily the ambition, but the ability to say, screw everyone else. This is what I think. And I'm willing to do crazy things to get to the bottom of it. So that's what I see in Foreman, and that's why he's incredibly neurotic.
Yeah, and I can totally see, like as we said, like while we were watching it, we were kind of critical of not that time was being placed on Foreman, but that so much of the episodes were placed solely on Foreman, and it was kind of getting in the way of everyone else's character development. And it's like, but as you like, based on the description you've done and the analysis, it's like I can totally see why, like, Foreman is focused on so much. It's like I think our Foreman discussion will probably be like relatively short, and that's because, like, not because Foreman is so obvious, but Foreman's like just character arc and development and background are so like well done. You totally understand, why Foreman is the way he is, because he's come from a bad background. He's like, really worked hard. There's an entire episode like going into, the way that he views different doctor styles, but he always gravitates towards House, even though he hates the way House does things, because he shares that kind of fire for just wanting to do something great. And it's it's like, because I mean, driven... Foreman is Foreman is probably the most pushy against House. He doesn't want to be House, and watching him slowly transform into that and sort of worry about it. At least we're seeing the start of that in season 1. It doesn't really pick up until later in the show. They do kind of start doling out very well, but it's a gradual thing, and it's established and taken forward really well in the first season. And it's probably the most interesting one, because it's the storyline that has the most conflict with House and his methods.
A conflict, but it's just weird, isn't it, that there's all this conflict, but they're so similar in a lot of ways.
It's kind of like a weird love story. It's kind of like, I don't know, like West End girl, East End boy. It's like, they're like, they. Foreman doesn't want to be with House, but deep down he loves him. It's like The Notebook or something. It's one of those classic, like, romances. It's like, I don't like you, but I love you. Or I love, like, your job. I love the way you do things. It's really strange. It's so intense. him and House's relationship, because there's this like deep hatred, but there's deep respect. I think
Yeah.
even Foreman says that at one point. Like he says, "I don't like House, I respect him." I think he says that to Vogler, and like that's the big thing. And it's interesting that Foreman does not screw over House during that entire Vogler arc, because Foreman despises House. He thinks he's disgusting at points, but my God, like he respects him. They always come back to each other. It's very intense in that way.
I guess it is a bit like a romance then, isn't it? Like an odd couple romance
Yeah.
of sorts. But the weird thing about it is that the more that Foreman ignores House, the more he becomes House, the closer he gets.
Yeah.
The more you ignore him, the closer he gets, to quote Morrissey. And I think that's something as well. I think also you get to see there are two other sides to him. So one is it really a kind of so his character growth, is it fueled by fear of what he could become with House, or do you think it's another kind of emotion? Because I couldn't really, that was the thing that I was really stuck on, is it fear or is it something else?
I think that I think Foreman's an interesting one, because I think Foreman is being pushed forward by he at points is like, he seems very resentful of his background. He doesn't like the fact that House even like brings it up or bases anything on it. He keeps saying like, I've worked very hard to be where I am. And I think it's that kind of ambition which is pushing him to the level where he's going to inevitably end up like House, but he also hates House. And it's sort of this, maybe maybe it's fear. I mean, we need to know more about like Foreman's feelings on his childhood. Right now, we seem to get the impression that he didn't really like it that much, and that's why he's worked so hard to escape that kind of like socioeconomic situation. But it's fascinating in the sense that that drive is gonna make him like House, but he doesn't want it, and it's sort of like he sees the finish line, and it's just him pushing his way there and not wanting to be there, which I find so interesting about Foreman. But yeah, I mean, I don't as you say, I think the reason why we know that Foreman worked hard because he didn't want to grow up the same way his parents did, but we don't know his feelings on that. We don't know if he's just like didn't like being in that situation, if he's scared of being in that situation. And I think in future seasons we'll probably learn more about Foreman's background to get better insight into that. But right now he seems angry and somewhat negative about his background. So for now that probably drives him. I mean, saying that anger drives Foreman would be a good start. He is clearly a deeply angry person.
Well, you see that in many different ways.
Yeah.
So, for instance, with the homeless case, what's the episode name? I've completely forgotten it.
Histories.
Histories. He is absolutely excoriatingly harsh to that woman.
Yeah.
He's like, just bounce her. Just give her what she wants. Get her out of here. And he learns very quickly that's not the way to proceed. And he even ignores the novelty of the case because he's so hung up on the idea of, trying to bounce this person because he thinks she's a loser.
Yeah.
Instead of actually looking at the novelty of the medical case. And that's one of the things that you learn through that episode, is that actually things are not as straightforward as you seem. And you see him in contrast with what House's approach is, which is, this is interesting. Just because she's a homeless person doesn't mean she can't be susceptible to a disease that requires treatment. Whereas he sees the poverty as the disease, the homelessness as the disease, rather than maybe that the person has a disease. I don't know. I mean, it's just, that's one of the things I saw as well. And I think the other thing that we should talk about is, before we move on, is that he's given a stark choice to join this, this high-flying doctor on the West Coast, or stay with House on the East Coast.
Yeah, who he'd worked with before, I
but
believe.
yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
This is his
And
big conflict in DNR.
Yes, because the doctor was the main patient's physician and a good friend. And what we see is, in the end, he sees the value of House's way of doing things. Whereas the other guy was willing to just give up, let the person die. House was willing to fight for the person and to try and figure out a solution and to follow his intuition. Whereas the other guy was just like, yep, okay, great. Do you want to go to the conference now? We have to move on. This will make an interesting paper. It kind of instrumentalizes the patient. And you can see in that episode the moment that Foreman realizes that he doesn't see patients as instruments for his own career progression in the same way as his former colleague or boss was. And House is definitely not someone who instrumentalizes his patients, especially not when they're in care. And that was something that was interesting. I'd like to see how far that progresses. And it also shows the value of House as a physician, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not all bad being House. What House does is really, really good. It's not like he's the devil, and what Foreman is looking towards or aspiring towards, even if while also consciously chafing against it or rejecting it. It shows the value of House as well. He's not just a psychopath with a medical license.
It shows shows like a more. He spends a lot of time with the patient. Shows a more compassionate side, and it's nice that we, as you say, see that Foreman isn't trying to instrumentalize the patient. He also sees them as people who need help, but he's also fascinated at the same time. And it's interesting because actually it kind of shows the irony of it, that the more friendly doctor is actually dehumanizing the patients more than House is, which I thought was a really nice way of doing it. It was very clever in the way that it kind of showed the irony and hypocrisy of that person's approach.
Yeah.
Which Foreman also clearly sees.
He did see that, and I think that was a particular moment for me where I saw the character growth. It was interesting.
Completely. It was also a nice episode because even though I think his name's Marty, the doctor, even though Marty was Marty Hamilton, that's the one. Even though Marty was like being sincere, he never came. It didn't feel like the show was using him as a straw man. It didn't feel like it was making him like a total insincere arsehole. Like he just was, but you could just tell in the way that he talked that he wasn't quite emoting with the patients as much as Foreman would like. And I like that it actually creates a conflict rather than just, it just straw manning Marty and being like, this guy's a complete, materialistic sociopath. You should be like House. Like it demonstrates the weakness of House's method. It's just that there's just small bits of the approach which seem to work with Foreman's worldview a bit better, and it's and it's coherent as well. It's you can kind of, and once again with Foreman's background, you can see why Marty's life. They're going to lunches, they're living a good life. Why Marty might want that a bit more. It's more comfortable. It's more, it's more enjoyable. It's probably what he's been dreaming of, and what he also thought he wanted as a doctor, because he was working hard to escape a kind of, economic situation.
He wanted that affluence.
Yeah, absolutely. But when it's available, he kind of, he sees that also the thing he wants is meaning in his work, which Marty can't offer. And it's nice the way his sort of the dreams he's always held and his current values are in conflict. It's really well written stuff. It's it's great. But as you know, you don't know which one he's going to pick. But then, as you see, there's this moment where you just see it in his eyes, which is a, great performance from Omar Epps again. He portrays Foreman extremely well.
So I think we've we thought that was going to be the short character, that character we were
Yes.
going to spend much time on. Now we come on to our favourite Antipodean physician, Chase.
Robert Chase.
Um,
Well, Chase. Chase is a weird one. I feel like Chase goes on, and the fact that Chase stays in the show so much, I think Chase is the most consistent cast member that remains. Chase ends up having a lot done with him, I think, but I do get the sense that the first season is very. I mean, this is the thing. Like, so Chase is really like Chase is charming. Chase is funny. Chase is a lot more like carefree than the other doctors, which I like that it's brought up in the performance and it's also brought up by the other characters. You know, it's not like everyone's going, Chase is so carefree, but he's not. He's just working like everyone else. Like, you can tell that Chase is carefree. And there's little things like, you know, during the differential diagnoses, when House makes a joke, like Chase laughs at them because Chase is enjoying the work more. He has more of the kind of goofier moments where he's trying to think outside the box. He comes up with some of the more crazy ideas. He'll, like, you know, when they're when they're looking into a patient's house, he'll be the one who like grabs some food and eats it. Like, he'll be the one who during that dominatrix scene, you know, he tries to imitate a dominatrix in order to get someone to consign a scent form. Like, Chase is doing those kind of crazy or strange things. And I think Chase in the first season gets by that he's portrayed really well by Jesse Spencer. And also he's just charming and nice to watch. And there's kind of like a hint that there's more to his like childhood. There's more to his background. He, you know, he might have more demons in his closet than he lets on. We see his father. We know they had a bad relationship. We kind of see the way that, you know, him and Chase kind of resolve their differences or start to, but then we also know that the father's going to die, but that doesn't happen like this season. We have to wait till next season for that storyline to play out. So as I say, like, there's a lot of investment in Chase, which I think is going to come in season 2, but I don't think it's quite there yet. But I think for now, Chase is just a really fun, enjoyable character with clearly some extras to his background. But I don't think he kind of has that. Not that I'm saying that any of the character arcs are complete. I think Cameron and Foreman have a long way to go. But by the end, they're kind of like, there's been some development. But I don't think Chase really develops. I think we learn about Chase and we know there's something to come, but it's in the later seasons where that's kind of paid off.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, as we have with the two other characters, that in the pilot, he, in an offhand comment from House, I think, he says that Chase got his position because of his father, because of nepotism.
Yeah.
And that's another jumping off point. He's the straight from casting doctor from a medical procedural drama. He's charismatic, charming, young, youthful, etc. Well, young and youthful are the same, but just to make that point that I'm not a complete moron. And what we see is little tiny tidbits, not as much juice to this character as the others initially. So, for instance, yeah, he's definitely got that kind of privileged background, but he has these weird relationships with things. So, for instance, with faith and the church and Catholic Church in particular. You know, he was originally going to become a priest, and that didn't really work out. You have this side to him that is very skeptical about fat people for some reason, which is or overweight people for some reason.
It's like Foreman's hatred of homeless people, and then there's Chase's hatred of fat people, and then I think Cameron hates people who have affairs.
Oh yes,
seems to be like everyone's got their weird little episode where they just hate a patient, but it's
all their weird prejudices.
Yeah. Remember, it's not a fat person; it's a fat child as well, which is even funnier.
Yeah,
just like Foreman, just like berating this child like in front of her. It's like, all right, mate, calm down.
Yeah, it's completely unnecessary and ridiculous. and then obviously his difficult relationship with his father, and he seems to be a little bit, he's on the frisky side of, in terms of his sexuality. He's obviously all right with that. So there are all these little quirks, and they all kind of coalesce in weird ways.
I think as
with
well
an
with
Australian twang.
with his attitude as well. I think like Chase is very carefree, and obviously he's like, gotten where he is because, people have made calls on his behalf. He comes from like a good situation. And I think a lot of the interesting part of him is the unveiling of that. So you think he's carefree just because he's rich and he doesn't care about anything. And then you kind of realize that maybe he's carefree and he doesn't take things seriously because you hear about like his alcoholic, abusive mother, the fact his father left him.
Oh, that was the other one, yeah.
And you start to think like, you start to realize, and even like when people bring it up that, he's the way he is because he's rich, he gets really defensive. And it's this nice, like, I think you discover that Chase isn't carefree because he is rich and hasn't had to work for anything. He's carefree because pretty much everyone in his life has abandoned him or like, ignored him. And you get the sense that Chase doesn't really care about anything, that he's in it for the ride. And I think like, even though that makes Chase do some weird, like more on the nose things, it doesn't come across as like some sort of character that they're just forcing to be interesting. It does feel like there's more below the surface and there's a lot governing that, which I think is the important thing about all the characters, when even though they're like they're just like acting normally, you really get a sense there's a backstory driving them and a lot of anxieties. And I think like Chase is an example where he doesn't have a lot of development on that, but you know that through meeting his family and hearing about his background that there's a driving force. It's not just that he's carefree and interesting and been written that way just so we'd have a fun character to watch. Like there's reasons why he's like that. And just because he's carefree doesn't mean it's for a good reason, which is what everyone consistently in the show assumes. They assume, oh, he's carefree because he doesn't care about anything, because he hasn't had to work for anything. No, he's carefree because his parents effectively abandoned him and that makes him not care about things. It's like a more horrible reason for it.
And I think this is something to reflect on. I mean, we said initially that with Cameron's origins, that there's no real like 0 point or origin point for those stories, but for Chase there seems to be some origin story stuff going on. How does that square up within the whole kind of team ecosystem? Because it is like he does not give a shit as much because very difficult relationships with those that were closest to him. I mean, that's different, right?
Yeah.
A different way of writing a character.
Absolutely. But as you say, it's like, but yeah, I wouldn't say that there's like an origin point in that simple way. I think like it's clearly lots of events have led to that. Like I think if it had been like Chase had a really good mother and then his father left him and he was like, from that moment on I decided not to care about anything, then it might be more simple. But because it's lots of events stacked and sort of a continual series of like circumstances that have led him there, I don't think it comes across as simplistic in that way. Unless you weren't accusing Chase's background of being simplistic. I didn't want you to come across that you're being meaner than you were.
No, I meant in the sense that it wasn't as though the characters have been constructed consistently. So they all have their own weird kind of points or lack of points of origin in some senses, that it's not all kind of the same like cookie cutter characters. Like everyone's like Cameron in the sense that all of their origins are really mysterious, that sort of thing.
I see what you mean. No, absolutely.
There's what they call a bit of heterogeneity involved with the character writing, which is good. No faults with that. I would say with Chase, there's obviously the big thing that happens in this arc. He's a dirty rat.
Yes, absolutely. He turns on House pretty quickly, and then but yet once again, it's interesting that he do that because Chase likes House. Chase finds House funny. He really enjoys being with him, but it's Chase is the first one to turn on him, and I think that's interesting because you'd expect it to be Foreman, but Foreman has a deep-rooted respect of House, whereas Chase's love of House is very paper thin. It's very surface level. It's I like this guy, but because of my personality, I don't really get attached to things. So, you know, if it's for my own benefit, I will screw House over, and I think that's played really well, and it's totally coherent with the characters. It's even though Chase likes House more, he's the first one to screw him over. Why? Because we know there's this backstory that has led him to not really be able to long-term emote with people or take things seriously. And even though he loves House, that includes that. It's right, there's a problem now. House needs to go. Let's get rid of him. And then as soon as Vogler turns on him, Chase goes straight back to House. Because as you say, he's a dirty rat, and it's but it's all kind of it both subverts your expectations because you sort of stereotypically think that because Foreman has the more negative view of House that he won't turn on him, but at the same time it's also incredibly coherent. I think that's extremely good character writing, that it can subvert your expectations like that, not in a way that's just people doing random things. It totally makes sense. And obviously we know that Cameron was never going to turn against House because that's totally not within her personality at all.
It's really interesting because what I always find so stark about it was that Chase turned on him, yet he's the longest serving fellow at the start of the series. Because the series begins in 2005, I believe, and he's been on the team since 2002, and then he betrays him. It's wow. You'd think because Foreman's the newest member of the team, he might be the more prone to a lack of loyalty. But I think Foreman learns very early on when he kind of subverts House's authority. When he took over a case by appealing to Cuddy, that doing that comes with some costs.
Yeah.
And also that you shouldn't mess with him because he'll always get you back. And Chase learns that the hard way.
Well, I think that makes Chase's. I didn't know that Chase had been with the team that long. Actually, I didn't know the exact dates, but I think that definitely makes Chase's betrayal even funnier. That he turns on him so easily. And also, makes the character moment even more effective if he's been there for longer.
Yeah, I mean, is that born out of having enough? He's had enough of this crap, or what? I just don't understand.
I just, as I say, I think that Chase's carefree attitude comes from the fact that he does not connect with people because he's been used to being screwed over. I think the reason why he left the seminary and stopped being a Catholic is just because he struggles to commit to things like that. I mean, if he can't even if he can't commit to even getting on with his boss, how can he commit to getting on with God? I mean, that's a much bigger commitment, and he can't even do basic commitments. So I think that's how I'd read it. But as you say, there hasn't been enough done with it, so he's still a mysterious entity in that way. I also wanted to point out that, yes, do you remember that I said that a fan had a certain observation about Chase that we didn't go into last episode?
Go on.
It was the possible theory that Chase was actually the reason why he, knew a few people in a BDSM relationship was because he was actually the sub. It's all a ruse.
For who?
That's why he knows so many dominatrixes, because he's not the dom, he's the sub.
Okay. Oh, I see. That's a nice little bit of subtext.
I love it as a theory because he runs into a net. He knows a lot of dominatrixes. That he claims that he was dating someone who was the sub, but were they? Because he's very submissive to
Well,
House.
there's some fan fiction to be written about that. Just saying.
There already has. I've definitely seen it, but
Oh,
it's I thought it was funny, the idea, like the chases a sub backstory or theory, which I mean, if you look at the whole show through that lens, that makes it very interesting. But so yeah, if you wanna move on, then we'll let's round off with the secondary team. There's Cuddy and Wilson. We'll start with Cuddy. I'm not sure if Cuddy's had that much character development necessarily. I think that kind of after the pilot relationship with House is very combative. It's like she's just telling him what to do and trying to make him less lazy. And I think once they kind of drop that element in the pilot that House is just lazy, their relationship becomes it becomes less combative. Like, obviously she's keeping things in check, but it's a very playful, more jovial kind of authority where, she's the kind of authority figure who, she's not just like Vogler, right? She's not dominating. She's not just screaming at people and blackmailing them. She comes down to their level. So in order to govern House, she she'll play his games and she'll try and outsmart him. And that's like the strength of Cuddy, is that she's domineering, but she does it in a way that's like on people's level. She plays by people's rules. And, that's why she's in the position that she is. That's why she's like doing so well. It's because she's really good at emoting and working on people's levels. And it's, but yeah, and then there's even that nice episode. I'd say the biggest insight we get into Cuddy, or her weaknesses at this moment, because Cuddy becomes a bit more emotionally complex as the series go on. We see her struggle through different life events. But the biggest one is where she takes House off the case in Damned If You Do with the nun, after Foreman dobs him in. And we see her, she's great at managing House, she's great at managing the hospital, but when we see her managing the team to come up with a way to cure the patient, she's unable to do it because she doesn't have that kind of creative spark and that kind of energy that House does. I think that's the one nice episode which kind of shows the differences between Cuddy and House's managerial strengths. And it's I'd say that's like one of my favorite Cuddy development moments in the first season. Is it shows a bit of a weakness to Cuddy, which I like. I like when shows like go into the weaknesses of the characters. It makes her a lot more complex than she should have been, than she could have been. She could have just been this like amazing manager, and it's nice that we at least show a point where she fails, but she's not just like a one note, like, I'm gonna yell at you until you do what you're supposed to do. She very much like gets down on the ground. I think she's a very well done character because of that. Even though we don't see a lot of her, she's a great authority figure. I think she also shows why Vogler is such a weak authority figure, because he's just so one note in that sense.
I guess so. But I would say, for me, the closest analogy for Cuddy is that she's like a ball-busting precinct captain presiding over a Lieutenant House. I do find that sort of stereotype much more conducive at the moment for understanding that relationship. It's like, you better give me results, House, with your unorthodox ways. You can't do that. These sorts of things.
Did you find her relationship with House in the pilot very different as well?
Well, yeah, I think all of the relationships in that pilot are very different, and I don't understand why Robert Sean Leonard loves that pilot so much, because it just doesn't make any sense in comparison to the rest of the series. But apart from introducing the basic bare-bone characters, or the skeletal structure of the show,
yeah,
but completely different completely different. And I think what the other thing that gets me about Cuddy is that, and I think something that's a bit of a weakness in the writing is that sometimes she's kind of made the butt of all these jokes. Sometimes literally the butt of a joke, and sometimes that works really well, especially with the back and forth between House and Cuddy. But sometimes it could just be like, oh, come on, more. Like, you give so much depth to the other characters, and you just use Cuddy as a whipping post for House's kind of witty tirades. It gets a little bit kind of difficult. But that being said, as the series progresses, we get a little bit more depth. That actually House is a little bit more of a charity case than he lets on, despite his great skill. And that Cuddy is a very strong advocate and protector of House. It's not all kind of, oh, House, you maverick. It's, oh, House, you maverick, and please, can you stop doing this? I'm trying to protect you from yourself.
Yeah, the Vogler arc definitely lets out that House is a bit more vulnerable than he should be. And it's funny that even though he's fully aware that Cuddy is defending him, he never thanks her, but House deep down has a lot to thank Cuddy for. And it's, as you say, like, Cuddy isn't just like, there's an emotional attachment, there's like this advocacy. It's that Cuddy, really fights for House behind closed doors, which is nice. She's an extremely loyal, practical person. And I think that, like, it just makes her character interesting. It gives you an inner working of her feelings for House rather than just, I'm angry at you all the time. And then you'd be like, well, why did you hire him? And then, you can't answer that question. When you start seeing the way that she defends House, you see why she actually hired House and what she needs from him and what she gets from him. Which is nice. It's not just this weird, like, plot hole where it's like, well, why would Cuddy put herself through this?
Yeah, and I think that opens up some more interesting development in the later series, but I'm still waiting for that. And as you say, there's a difference. She's a people manager. He's more like a case manager in a way, or she can deal with the macro. House can deal with the micro stuff. And that's a nice little division for now. And I guess the other thing is there seems to also be a little bit of frisson between the two of them that hasn't really been elaborated on. Like, they've got a bit of a history, especially when you think of what Vogler was saying in the series, that maybe her proximity to House in a lot of ways makes Cuddy blind to some of the infractions that House performs that are actually unacceptable. And in a way, Vogler is right about that. He's right that House is given a lot of latitude, and that's something we want to figure out why. And I hope that the rest of the series does that really well.
Yeah, totally. For now, she's a person, but she's much more a manager than a. We don't know her as a. We don't know, like, her deep, like, private life. We know her as a formal managerial role, and the later seasons will expand on that, and I look forward to it. But I think for now it's a good establishment. And then going on to other possible bare bones characters. What do you think about Wilson during season 1? Because it certainly, for me, watching it back, takes him a long time to get going. I think that he has the kind of opposite of the Chase problem in that he's Wilson is a really, interesting, nice guy. He's charming. And there's, like, he's got a relationship with House, and you kind of want to know more about it and why it is that way. But I feel like there's not a lot given to you for a very long time. And I think Wilson comes off extremely flat because, like, kind of his purpose is lost a bit. Like, you have, like, his goal is to be more of a moral arbiter to House. But because the context of the relationship starts with cases, it's just Wilson telling House what he should do within the context of a case, which is kind of what Cameron does. So I was at first a bit confused about Wilson's purpose. And then yeah, over time, whenever it comes to like life issues, like is House happy? Is House taking too many drugs? That's when Wilson has conversations with House. He's the only person who can have conversations with House. And, and then when House and Cameron go on that date, Wilson's the only person who is an advocate for House's feelings. And you start to see, you're like, oh, I get that. Like Wilson is the audience's connector to House's inner private life that no one else has access to because no one else has seen House in that vulnerable state. So it's Wilson's purpose and character comes out a lot more as the series goes on, but he takes a while to get going. And the fact that the first episode just started off like with him just lying to House to make him take a case and just being overtly caring, I found him extremely weak for the first few episodes, at the very least. But
I think and I think in the pilot, like you say, it's very weak. Yeah, the lying and everything is fine, but the one thing I would say is he's supposed to literally be like a Watson in the pilot. He is literally here's a new case that I've found for you, House. You should take it on. It's like, okay, that's really interesting. I'm not Sherlock Holmes. I'll take the case. And then throughout that episode, he just starts overtly explaining House's behavior. And it just gets like especially when the patient in the first episode, she wants to die. And he goes, no, she's become less a problem, more of a person he respects. And it's just, give me a break.
Yeah, it's awful.
He respects her. And it's just like, what? He's not like, he's just like, becomes like a Irving, the explainer character. Just, here are the things House is really thinking inside of his head. And it's like, really?
Yeah, that's okay. That's their early attempt at like House being the Wilson being the bridge to House's like private life and feelings. But it's really dodgy because like, it's just Wilson announcing what House is thinking. Whereas when it's, House is detoxing and Wilson confronts him in his office and they have like a proper conversation that people would really have, people who are concerned and comfortable. And, we're watching that conversation, like that feels natural. That feels like, Wilson is bringing us into House's life by questioning his life decisions and being concerned for him. He's not berating him. He's like concerned. He's his friend. Whereas the first episode is just, I am his friend. I know him very well. This is what he is thinking. And it's like, as you say, just give me a break. It's like, it's because they're trying to fit him in that archetypal Watson role. And then the show becomes its own monster. And then they actually find a meaningful place for Wilson to be. And then on top of that, we find some like nice little things out about Wilson, like some like, some things that make him a bit more interesting, but they're very alluded to. It's not like, Chase's backstory. We know that Wilson has a marriage currently. We know that it's not going very well. And we kind of know that Wilson is maybe edging on the verge of having an affair, but he's in denial about it. But we don't right now know like how all the dots are connected. We know that Wilson's a really nice guy. We know that he's a bit like Cameron. He likes to fix things. He likes to be, a really nice person. But it's we don't know the destructive side of that, which comes out a bit later on in the season. But for now, we know that Wilson's a nice guy. He gives us some insight into House. He's charming, and he maybe has a bit more like ghosts, skeletons in the closet, and he might be up to some dodgy stuff. He might be about to, screw his wife over by having an affair. But it's very alluded to at the moment. I'd say out of everyone, Wilson takes the longest to get going, and I don't mean that as a criticism that Wilson is bad. I really enjoy Wilson in the first season, but Wilson definitely steps up in later seasons.
Okay. Yeah. we see some pretty depressing things, such as Christmas with House, eating Chinese takeaway, having a good old time with his buddy. And I guess in another way, you could view it through the kind of buddy cop system,
Yeah.
but only during that first pilot bit. Then all of a sudden it just falls away, and he becomes a kind of not a moral. You say a moral arbiter. I say kind of more like he challenges House when it comes to the ethics or the morals of a problem. He doesn't arbitrate.
I might be using the word arbiter wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
He's like a kind of. He might be like a reflecting pool for the dilemmas that House faces.
Moral mirror.
And I don't think it's a moral mirror.
Yeah, sorry. I think I was trying to sound clever by using the word arbiter. I was clearly using it wrong.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, I think it's no accident that he's shown as an oncologist as well. He seems the destructive side of his caring is that he takes on the most grave and sorrowful aspects of medicine. You know, cancer is a very destructive disease that requires treatment, painful treatment, sometimes very dire prognoses, but he never gives up. And I think that's analogous to how his relationship with House is. He sees House as deeply flawed. The prognosis of House's life seems very bleak. He will die alone, it seems.
Yeah.
Dissatisfied with human relations. And he tries to treat House and to be with House through that difficulty. And one of the ways he does that is to challenge House on his actions to make him a better person. That might be a completely over-the-top analysis, but it seems to me something interesting. And I think also the oncologist element also is a hint at Wilson's the destructive side of his vocation as a healer. He takes on the hardest tasks. He takes on the most difficult of diseases. It takes on the things that come with the most pain and sorrow. Because the people can be young, they can be really old, but it's never expected.
That's a very interesting point about the job descriptions as well, because I think like House's team aren't good at telling people that they're going to die, because House never lets people die. Pretty much, I think only 2 or 3 people die in the first season because he's a fixer. He gets in there and he fixes it, whereas Wilson is very much like, because the cancer rate has such a high kill rate, it's not that Wilson isn't a good doctor. He just is dealing with something that involves a lot more death. He's sort of more a guiding figure. Like, he treats, he helps, but at the end of the day, if someone's going to die, he's there for them. He holds their hand, he tells them they're going to die, and he's there to like give them the emotional support as they do it. And I think you could say he's like that with House. He's kind of helping a case which is, heading to oblivion with House, and that's kind of like what he's good at. But at the same time, it's like, House sees oncology, House sees like Wilson's job a bit as pointless sometimes, because it's like, oh, your patient's going to die, who cares? Whereas Wilson is like, no, that still matters, the way that they die. Whereas House sees that kind of element of it as pointless. Once they're dead, it's failed. And I think like, their 2 different job descriptions really sums up like how they think differently about not only medicine but their personal lives, and how, as you say, like Wilson is so ready to take on these like real emotional hardships which House just wouldn't even deal with, which I guess is why their friendship works.
But the other thing is, it's with Wilson, he's always focusing on all these kind of very difficult difficult cases, but he doesn't look at the cost that it has on him. He's so transfixed on saving others that he's neglecting himself, in a sense. So his affliction, in a way, is similar to House's, because his life is it might be that the rate of House's path towards oblivion is a lot faster, a lot more racier, a lot more dramatic. But with Wilson, his life is slowly unraveling, and he's kind of in denial about it, and he's kind of not facing up to it by focusing on House and focusing on other people. He externalizes everything else and doesn't really focus on himself.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, House is his number one patient.
I think that's a great observation.
In the same, yeah, it's just an interesting thing, and I hope we get to see that play out, maybe, or maybe not.
Who knows? We'll find out more.
Yeah.
But going down the food chain even more to the bottom of the barrel, we scraped the bottom of the barrel so hard that we're hitting the concrete. It's Vogler, also known as Cuddy Light. No, I'm joking. He's got a bit more going on, but as you said, like, you revealed the backstory of this, that it was forced upon the showrunners by the head of Universal. This is not something they wanted. The head of Universal wanted an antagonist. Even though there were antagonists each episode with the diseases, and House himself is an antagonist. He's extremely self-destructive. But hey, we needed another guy, and that's why they gave them Vogler.
Hey, are you saying the protagonist is also an antagonist?
So
we can't have that. No, we need to have an actual antagonist. Let's do it.
You're more down on Vogler than I am, I think. So, yeah. do you want to give your feelings on Vogler?
I could summarize it in a sentence.
Go on.
A waste of time.
Fair enough.
Okay, sorry. I'll retract that. I think there's more to say.
Go on.
An absolute abject waste of time.
I mean, I think at the very least, like, even though Vogler is kind of like a more boring version of Cuddy, he is just, I'm gonna just tell you what to do and you have to do it without, like, any kind of additional extras which make him a good leader. I do enjoy watching Vogler. I think Chi McBride plays him very well. And he has a lot of fun with it. He plays it very campy, and I think they did the best they could with Vogler. But I think, like, although this isn't exactly like paid off, I think that Vogler at least has a very House approach in that he will try and strong arm someone and put them in a position where they have to submit to his will, right? Because House will do it through like trickery, lying, like anything to get the patient to do what he wants. Like, that's how House does it. And when Vogler comes in, House thinks he can use those techniques, and unfortunately Vogler uses, like, what's at his disposal, which is, like, his finances, the fact that he employs you, like the fact that he can strong arm people into threatening them to remove, like, he can threaten to remove funding. Like, that's how Vogler does business. And I think at the very least, like, that gives an interesting, obstacle for House. Unfortunately, I think that Vogler will say something like, I'm going to fire everyone, I'm going to fire House. And then in the next episode, he'll be like, okay, well, instead of that, why don't you just do me a speech? And although those things lead on to other interesting things, I do think that Vogler will randomly pull back, which is kind of played off as Vogler trying to be reasonable. Like, he gets heated up and then he gets reasonable, but I feel that Vogler could have been a lot more intense than he was. Even though I like the finale with Vogler, I think it's very much like, there's a, will House keep his job, won't he? And there's an interesting arc of how he convinces people that he should keep his job. But in a sense, it's still, it's very light. It's very, like, not played on as much as it could be. And I think the fact that Vogler never, because there's a lot of flashback sequences, like, House has a lot of moments where he thinks on people, he imagines what people would say to him. But Vogler never appears in those, and I think that says a
I
lot.
think that says everything.
Yeah.
And also, like you say, the inconsistency. Like, I'm going to crush you, House. Oh, by the way, can you use your diagnostic skills to diagnose the problems with this senator? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
pick a lane.
Yeah, like he's kind of saying, you're really good at your job. But yeah, I don't want you. But you're really good at your job.
Yeah, I want to crush you.
Because he cures the senator, right? Which, kind of is what Vogler wants. But Vogler doesn't seem to see the value in House outside of that. It's extremely sporadic. It's like, okay, like, yeah, he doesn't wear his coat. He doesn't listen. But, he sticks to himself. And he did cure that senator, which is going to give you a bit of leeway, like, politically. Like, is there no value in House there? It's,
No, it must be destroyed. Oh, hi, can you fix this again? Oh, no. Just do a speech. Oh, I'm going to crush everything you stand for. Oh, it's just like, well, are you playing an antagonist or are you playing something that's going to bring cases? I mean, just, what is it?
Yeah, especially with...
What's the line?
Especially with Vogler's, like... Because, Vogler gives House that speech, but I think Vogler should be a bit cleverer than that, because House could get up on that stage and say anything, and then House does say anything, and then Vogler's like, you've embarrassed me and ruined my company, and it's like, well, yeah, maybe don't put House, the man who is known for not listening to anything, in a public forum. I totally get, like, strong-arming him into firing people and forcing him to put on a coat, but giving him a platform to slag you off seemed very silly at the time. I think, yeah. Watching through Vogler again, I like Vogler. I think, I don't think it's a good idea, but I think the way that the team implemented it is probably the best way they could have done it. But at the same time, I think, Vogler's just too OP. He just comes in and they have to keep nerfing him because he's like,
I've got lots of money.
Yeah, like, he's too powerful. That's the problem, and it's like, so he keeps having to do all these random weird things where he backtracks, and it's a shame, because they make him really antagonistic, and then they kind of have to keep pulling it back, and it feels a bit inconsistent watching it again. And Vogler doesn't leave much of an impact. Like, he's only in there for 5 episodes and then he's gone.
It's one of those things. He's not, with a character like that, they could have done it in a way where he's more like a pervading sense of doom, rather than, I'm going to crush you, this episode, I'm going to crush you down. By the way, I've got this problem. I need you to solve it. Then I'm going to crush you. Do you understand? It's like, okay.
I completely agree.
Or, I'm going to completely subvert your will. I'm going to completely subvert your will. You're going to do this speech for me. Now can you solve this problem? You're still a doctor. I mean, it would have been fun if they just stuck House in an office and said he couldn't go, he had like a desk job or something like that. Like, instead of, kind of stage it. Like, House is first, he chafes against Vogler, and then Vogler retaliates and says, I don't think these high-flung diagnostic cases are for you. You're off. I'll promote one of your underlings.
Yeah, like things like that.
He gets back, and then House gets back at that and says, no, I'm back on the case because you messed up by having one of my underlings do it. Now I'm back. And then he'll go, well, then I'm going to go for your job. Oh, unless you do what I tell you to do. Then push with that. But there is no sense of like a consistent level of like the big confrontation was going to happen, and in effect there wasn't really a big confrontation. It was just all in a weird boardroom scene with House kind of parading in and out of the kind of courtroom arbitration between Vogler and Cuddy, which was just really bizarre. It's like, hi, you're talking about my future, but I need you to talk about this. Goodbye. Hello. Goodbye. Hello. Goodbye. And they're going, what is the nature of healthcare? Is it a business or is it a charity? And it's just like, hi. These really high-flung topics intermingled with House's future. And then all of a sudden he just rolls and goes, hey, how's it going?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of comedy in that.
It's very weird.
There's a lot of comedy in that, which I think is on purpose. But I agree with you. It's like, it's very insane after a while.
Yeah, maybe I don't see the funny side of a character that's completely pointless, but whatever. I'll deal with it.
I think Vogler to you is like, those people that, you instantly didn't like Vogler, so you can't find him funny now.
Yeah.
It's one of those situations. But
Did the Doctor House in the house?
but thank God it's over, and thank God by not doing it that we got the finale episodes, which they threatened to cut because they're the best ones. And
Yeah, I agree.
fantastic. But well, thank you, Gaz, for joining me in. Well,
That was very hesitant. Well, why don't I do it? Thank you, Harvey, for being here. It's been a really big episode, a bumper episode of DDXtra. An hour and a bit. That's pretty long for us for an extra episode. Usually it's about 30, 40 minutes.
it is, but I mean, hopefully this is kind of designed for people who, like, just want to listen to some people casually just talk about the characters for a bit. I mean, we try and keep it as succinct as possible. Like, hopefully it's interesting, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of characters to talk about. We dumped everyone into one episode, then House into the rest. So it's just the way it is, unfortunately.
Yeah. But thank you, Harvey, for your forbearance and your words of accurate and acute analysis.
And
And
yours?
thank you to me. And we'll see you next time on Differential Diagnosis episode. Which episode are we doing? Oh, yeah, 3 stories. That's it. Fantastic.
See you later, guys.